Ex-police officers of Reddit. What is the scariest, creepiest thing to happen to you on the job? Dispatcher here. Had a woman call in on 911 whispering. Could barely understand anything, but I managed to get an address. I kept the line open until the officers got there. Officers get to the house and a male steps out. They asked him why someone dialed into 911. He says must have been an accidental dial and there's no emergency. They obviously find this suspicious, so they hang around talking outside to the male, and one officer manages to spot a tiny hand stuck out of a small window waving around. They go inside the house and save a female who was beat bad and charge the male with forcible confinement. It makes my hair stand up to this day. Goddamn, I was visualizing this as a scene from a movie when the cops asked the wrong person who dialed 911 and botched potentially saving the victim, but few glad they were smart enough to stick around. Ex-police officer here. This is the call it made me decide law enforcement wasn't for me. Conducted a no-knock search warrant on a drug house. First officer through the door secures the suspect closest to the door. Second officer secures the person second closest to the door, etc. I was the fourth officer in, and of course my suspect ran. I chase him down a hallway. He runs in a room and slams the door. I burst in right after, jump on top of him, and get him secured. Before I cuffed him, he had his hand under the bed. I took him to the living room where the other suspects were being held. Go back on the room and look under the bed. Double-barrel sawed-off shotgun. My heart sank. I took a few photos for evidence and collected the gun. Opened the barrels and found it was loaded with 2 slugs. I'm not sure he would have shot me had he gotten a hold of it, but it was enough to keep me up for 2 nights. I resigned 3 weeks later. You're smart. I used to drive a cab overnights in Chicago. Got robbed by gunpoint one night. And it shook me up enough to take a week off, and a friend talked me back into it, because how likely is it that it could happen again? A month later it happens again, except this time they fire off the gun as they are fleeing and it whizzes past my ear by an inch and blows out my window. That time I got the hint and effectively resigned immediately. I responded to a call for a subject shooting a shotgun in his house. When I arrive, his mom runs out screaming he's in his room. I have her wait by my car. Me and another officer enter. I am point man. We make our way to his bedroom and I turn the corner. He is sitting in a chair with a shotgun and looks at me. He casually greets me. I had dealt with him before from a past arrest. I attempt to talk to him and try to keep him calm. After about a minute, he just says, "Doesn't matter. Thanks for trying though," and then shoots himself in the head. Did not survive. Still haunts me, but thanks to therapy and family, I have handled as well as I could, and I'm still a cop. My grandfather was a cop for 40+ years. He recently told me a story about getting a call from a neighbor saying they hadn't seen their neighbor, let's call him Bill, for a few days. My grandfather and another cop, John, show up at Bill's house. They knock and knock, but no answer. They check the doors and lo and behold, one is unlocked. As they enter the house, my grandfather starts calling out, "Mr. Bill, are you home? Is everything all right?" This goes on while they search the house. Finally, Officer John goes down the steps to the basement. My grandfather hears him say, "Oh, Mr. Bill, there you are. Is everything all right?" My grandfather goes down the steps to see Bill standing in his basement in his suit, complete with his hat, and one thing that was very, very off. My grandfather goes, "John, I think Bill is dead." Dumbfounded, Officer John says, "He's standing right there. And you don't see the rope around his neck." So, apparently Bill had hung himself. With clothing line rope, tied it to a beam in his basement, and kicked away the stool he was standing on. Over the however many days it had been, the rope had stretched so much that Bill looked like he was standing in the dark basement. Out of all the stories I've heard so far, that was the saddest, funniest, because of Officer John's confusion, and darkest story I've heard my grandfather tell. Then the figure abruptly turns around. Their face is covered in shadow. After a couple seconds, a gleam of light comes from both of the spots where the eyes reside. Right before the thing drops to the ground and scuttles towards you, and right before you feel something rest itself on your shoulder, you realize 2 things. The man's head turned much further than it should have, and human eyes don't glow. I was working an off-duty job at a local theme park. It was an overnight, so the park was completely closed with no one around besides the occasional cleaner or painter. I usually just sit in my patrol car on my laptop, but when I get sleepy or need to stretch my legs, I get out and go for a walk around the empty park. Let me tell you, amusement parks are really fucking creepy when they are empty at night. but I got used to it. On this particular night, I was doing my normal walk, on my phone, probably on Twitter, when I look up and see a lady who appeared to be in her 60s, nonchalantly sitting at a table in one of the restaurants that was closed, like just sitting there in the dark. This really confused the hell out of me, and she was not dressed like an employee. I tapped on the window, and she turned her head and stared straight at me. I asked loudly what she was doing, and she just turned her head back away from me and ignored me. I tried to open the door, and it was locked. I called on the radio for park security to come over there and confirm if this lady was supposed to be there while I walked back to my car to get the set of keys I kept in there. As I walked back to the front of the restaurant, two security guards are walking up at the same time as me. One of them peers in the window and asks, "Somebody was in here?" I look and the lady is no longer at the table. We get it open and search every crevice of this place, and there was not a soul in there. You can say I was a little freaked out. We went back and checked the exterior cameras, and nobody entered or exited. To this day, this creeps me out and I can't explain it. Responded to a single vehicle crash out in the county. Found the car. It had left the road, crashed through a fence, rolled at least 3 times, came to rest right side up. The driver was mangled pretty bad, and actual paramedic says he's deceased. We secure the scene, wait for the coroner. Coroner gets there, declares him dead. Starts his investigation/documentation. About 20 minutes into it, we are all near the coroner van discussing the situation. We are about 20 feet from the victim car. The driver, who hasn't been removed yet, sits up, looks around and starts the car. We all jumped about 5 feet straight into the air. Driver survived. Loads of investigation into how 2 trained pros declared a live man dead. I can't speak to what that paramedic and coroner. As a side note, the education and training of coroners in the U.S. varies considerably in different jurisdictions, and it is not the same thing as a forensic pathologist, which is a specialized medical doctor, did or did not check, but as a physician, before we pronounce someone dead, we typically don't just feel their wrist for 3 seconds, then dramatically call the time of death like TV doctors do. It's a pretty detailed process, especially when someone is just found unresponsive versus someone who has been undergoing resuscitation attempts for an extended period. My uncle was a cop in LA. He was attending a road traffic accident where a car had been racing round a corner too quickly, gone off the road and gotten stuck between some cement blocks. The car was completely vertical, the driver facing down to the ground and the trunk facing the sky. The guy was relatively coherent, but he trapped in the car because the front of the car was crunched and his legs were stuck. The car set on fire before they could get him out, and he was basically burned alive. When they got the car out, all that was left was bones, apart from his fleshy legs that were preserved in the foot well.